Today feels like a good day to be honest with ourselves. Tomorrow's not good for me. I have to pretend I'm not a complete mess, devoid of love and happiness, but today feels right. Teen dramas can be weird in how they tend to frame the sexual relationships between teenagers. If a character is over-sexualized, it enforces upon the audience to also view them through that lens, thus making us complicit in those desires. It takes that moment when it finally clicks in your mind that, hey, this is a teen drama and this person that I'm viewing through my overly indulgent male gaze is a teenager. The framing of the character or their sexuality in any given scene justifies my gratification because it all boils down to what the text is trying to communicate regarding said character's sexual encounters. After all, sex is a part of life, and there is merit to a show that is willing to explore the topic with some nuance. But it's funny what we think that entails. Teen dramas never tend to discuss sexuality unless in such cases where the point is to explore thematic intrigue from those sexual encounters. If it's not about assault or any of the adjacent encounters that tend to make sex seem ugly and uncool, we just do not talk about it. The result of this is that when sex is treated as too normal, we start to think about what we get from it and rarely what we lose in the process. In a show about young adults finding themselves through relationships, then I'll take it. Shows like Love, You're the Worst, or Insecure need sex to be normal because it's a show about adults and adults have sex, whether they're married or not. Before I dropped Riverdale following the first season, there was a plot line where Archie has sexual relations with his teacher, Miss Grundy. Now, that relationship was statutory in nature, but during those scenes, the way the direction and cinematography framed their encounter in such a way that was titillating to the viewer made me wonder what I was supposed to be feeling. As a heterosexual male, it imposes upon me to think about the act itself and not necessarily its implications. Now, in the comics, Miss Grundy is a woman in her 50s at least, so why was it so important to make her younger, if not to make her more desirable and her relationship with Archie more believable? Was the fact that she was more desirable meant to make the audience question their own place in their affair? We'll never know for sure, but in the end, it's alluded to that she found another teenager to groom and is eventually killed off. What, was this her comeuppance? Is this where she gets what she deserves? What I'm getting at is, it's amazing what a show can get away with just by keeping its cast of actors attractive. That and the framing of these sexual encounters, coupled with the fact that these are teenagers on screen, is a bizarre thing to sell to teenagers still trying to find their place in the world through relationships, whether sexual or otherwise. Now, the best of these shows, like Sex Education and Never Have I Ever, explore these topics with such level-headed complexity that they are, in my mind, some of the best teen-centered shows that Netflix has ever produced. But now, let me raise you another issue. These shows are about sex, or relationships, or the characters' relationships towards sex, so not exploring those topics with much needed nuance would have been detrimental to the story. My interest here is purely on the Gossip Girls, the Pretty Little Liars, the Teen Wolves, or the Vampire Diaries, shows that center around teenagers but never really explore the fact that they are teenagers and have concerns that teenagers will have. Wishful power fantasy aside, some level of responsibility has to be taken here, especially in media that has the capacity to influence. An article I read during my research for this video put emphasis on the fact that these shows do not depict teenagers realistically, stating, "During a time where bodies are drastically changing with fluctuating weight and skin problems, seeing actors with the ideal perfect face and body can worsen young viewers' underlying self-esteem issues." But on a technical level, I do not share this author's concern on this, as the people who decide to become actors are usually good-looking people, and the people who make these shows want them to be appealing enough to warrant an audience's investment. And as the audience, we connect with people we find attractive more often than people we don't. This isn't a problem with the dramas, this is a problem with us as the audience. We're shallow. This is the world we created. We can't foster a community of superficiality and then turn around and condemn it when it was us who decided that that was the ideal criteria for investment. It doesn't work like that. Let's talk about a show I used to love with my heart and soul, Pretty Little Liars. This was my favorite show in my late teens to early 20s. Like Riverdale, Liars depicted a relationship between a high school student and her teacher. But the difference here is in the framing of Arya and Ezra's relationship as an all-consuming forbidden love. Like Miss Grundy, the actor who plays Ezra is very attractive, and I think by casting someone whom the viewers would like to be with in any other circumstance, teen dramas are able to recontextualize these relationships as something apart from their reality. Quite frankly, sex and relationships in teen dramas is more of an aesthetic experience than it is a vehicle to tell stories. Sex between teenagers, sex between literally any real people, is not this sexy, nor should it be. Everything is always in the right place at all times for me to believe that this is supposed to matter. There is a frequently reiterated rule that sex isn't just a means to the end of story, but story is a means to the end of sex. I think The Vampire Diaries is the biggest offender here. There is this weird gray area that the show seems to tiptoe around. Now, Stefan is a 164-year-old vampire, but he was turned at 17, making him physically 17 years old. Elena is 17, which makes them the same age, right? It all depends on how you define age. Is age the number of years you've lived or your experiences? How do we even parse what's going on here? And no one talks about it. I'm sure people have talked about it. Now, Damon, his older brother, is just a walking sex offense waiting to happen. Physically, he's a man in his 20s. But in the first season, we do witness him seducing and shacking up with high school kids, including Caroline, who was also 17 at the time. But he's sexy and witty, so it's fine. Now, I am not calling out the show. I actually love it a lot, and Damon is always worth the price of admission for me. I love everything that's wrong about him, even if the show is kind of a mess. What I did like, however, was how even though Damon was kind of promiscuous, after Elena's feelings for him were established, he had to try very hard not to engage her in that capacity. Because while it may have been everything he ever wanted at one point, it would not be an expression of anything that wasn't already obvious. Their expression of love for each other was in their shared desire to save Stefan, and in their pursuit of that goal, they were able to establish a connection. Becoming the person that deserves to be loved by Elena was an expression of understanding and connecting to her on a deeper level than sexual. I think for me, this was The Vampire Diaries at its best. I am not saying that their sexual encounter did not mean anything. In fact, I think it was the most meaningful sex scene in the entire show because of what came before it. I think most teen dramas rarely earn this encounter like they need to. It's just all par for the course now, and the most bare minimum you can do is at least earn your sex appeal. Thank you for watching.